G'day, this is Andrew Price here from Blender Guru. Welcome to another Blender tutorial. We are going to be making this grassy meadow that you can see in front of you. So we're going to be learning a whole bunch of different things. Grass, obviously, as well as making a volumetric mist. This, nice hazy morning sort of look. Particle distribution, so making like the realistic choppy look of how real grass looks in the world, adding a trail path through it, lighting, a whole bunch of different stuff that you can use to make your own nature scene, or I don't know, you could add a little character, maybe a car sitting on the lawn there. You could do a whole bunch of things. So yeah, without further ado, I think we should, first of all, let me show you what the scene looks like. This is it right here. So I'll be providing you with a few models. So, this little shrub and this little tree here, which you can download for free. And for the grass, we're going to be using something which some of you may know of called the Grass Essentials Pack. So that's a new product from Blender Guru, which enables you to create realistic grass. The reason we're using the Grass Essentials Pack and not strands was because I realized, a couple of years ago actually, that strands, they look nothing like real grass stalks do in the real world. And so you just can't get realistic results with it. So we created the Grass Essentials Pack so that, you can create realistic looking grass scenes. So that's what I'm thrilled about. That's why I'm using it, so we can finally get into some nice real looking grass. So yeah, anyways, without further ado, and if you don't have the Grass Essentials as well, there's no pressure, like you don't have to buy it to complete this tutorial. I'm providing you with one of the grass species, the main grass species that we're using to make this grass field here, so you can download that for free as well. But yeah, alright, let's go ahead and get started now. So I'm going to go ahead and replace the default cube. Always replace it, I don't know when we ever keep it really, with a plane, and just make it fit, roughly the size of the grid floor. And just so you know what scale that you're working with, if you just have a look at the size of it, it's 16 meters. And that's just so that you know that as you're working on your scene, that, you're working with a scene that's about 16 meters in length. So that tells you the height of other things like trees and other things like that. I've just turned on my screencast keys tool, by the way. You don't need to do anything. This is just so you can see what I'm pressing over there. Should have done it before I started, but had to restart. All right, so snapping the camera to my viewport, to where my view is, yeah? And I'm just gonna move the camera in, and I'm gonna keep it fairly low to the grass field here, about there, and I wanna keep roughly 1/3 of the camera above the horizon. So we're mainly focusing on the grass, but also a little bit of the horizon as well. And that's just a composition thing, just make sure that there's an actual focus, which in this case is grass. Okay, so adding the grass, let's get to that. So because we're using the Grass Essentials, we're going to be appending in different grass species. To do that, you want to jump to a new layer, so it's not all on your main layer, and you want to go to File, Append. And then here, once you've you can download this model here, by the way, off Blender Guru, and you can play along at home. But we're going to be appending in the Grass Bahia grass, however you pronounce it, no idea, but it looks pretty cool. So we're going to click on it, and then the one that you want to click on here is Group. Always go to Group, and then we're going to click on Append. All right, and then you click Append, and there we go. We got the Grass Bahia looks. Grass looks. Anyway. So with this one here, now that we've added it into the scene, if we go back to our main plane here, go to the particle settings, we can add a new particle system, and then just from this drop down list here, just select the name of that particle, because it's in the the data of the scene now. We can just select it, and now we have grass on our scene. We've got a few sprigs here and there. It looks like sort of end of the world drought happening, but it's there. So you want to increase the emission amount. So for a lot of scenes I go, like 30,000 is generally enough. This is obviously not enough. This is such a big scene that we're going to go with more particles in order to get the point across. For my final one, I think I went with like 500,000, which might be too much for some people's machines. The benefit, one of the good things instead of using strands is that it doesn't use as much memory. So these will actually render fine on a GPU. So that's also one of the benefits of it. But anyways, so I'm just keeping it at 30,000 for now. Before you amp up, the particle amount, one thing you want to do is down here. You can see how slow it's going right now. So let's just go to the modifier stack here. I'm just going to turn off the view from the viewport so it's not slowing us down. And then just underneath display, I'm just going to set this amount to be 10%. Actually, no, I'm going to go 5%. So 5% of 30,000 particles will be viewable in the viewport, but the rest will only display in the render view mode. The other thing is on our on our layer where we appended in our grass system, this one, because it's linked, it would also have 30,000 particles on it, which if you add in more weeds and stuff, this whole scene here can get a little bit crazy, like on this layer. So just as a habit, just turn it off from the viewport there. Anyway, getting a little bit too advanced. Let's just stick to this grass here so we can focus on one thing. All right, so if we gave this a render right now, actually, yeah, let's give this another render. You can see I've already attempted this tutorial once, and now I'm giving it another go. All right, to do a test render, I'm going to have to obviously set a sun lamp so we can see something. So with this sun here, I'm just going to rotate it about that angle there, and you know, rotate it that direction so it's a little bit, the sun is pointing in the same direction as the camera, which is good. And well, let's just go with these settings, and let's keep the strength at about 10. All right, and let's just see how this looks with 30,000 particles. It probably will not, yeah, there you go. It will not look fantastic because there's not enough. But one thing you will notice is, if you look from the camera view, is that you've got grass on either side of the camera. Now, people that have got the Grass Essentials, or even if you followed all the tutorials, you know what I'm talking about here. This grass that's outside of the camera view is going to be calculated in the render. I wish it wasn't, but it is. So you'd think the Blender would go like, oh, it's outside of the view of the camera, forget about it, don't worry, it'll be fine, we'll just focus on here, disregard everything else. But it actually will calculate all this stuff as if it's in your scene. So you don't want that. You want to try and get away with the least amount of particles as possible in a render. So we want to try and get all those particles over here. So the way to do that is with weight painting. So weight painting, if you've never done it, you hit Control Tab, the whole plane is blue. And this allows you to paint onto your mesh where you want things to appear. Now, before you do any weight painting, because it paints according to the geometry of the mesh, we've only got 4 vertices right now, so if we try and did any weight painting, it doesn't give you much detail, you know. So we need to append this a few times. So let's go subdivide, and then I'm just going to increase the number of cuts. I'm going to type in 150. Which sounds like a lot, but we're going to be painting in a pathway using weight painting as well, so that'll be good to have that extra geometry in there. Alright, so one other thing when it comes to particles is, if you have a look at this render here, if you look in the distance, like the grass amount is almost okay, like on the horizon there, like the grass looks a little thicker, but as you get closer to the camera, there's huge gaps in it, and that's just because of perspective. Like as things get closer and closer, like you can start to see big gaps. It's the same as if you actually stood on a grass lawn. Looking out into the distance, you can't see any gaps in the grass. But if you look at your feet, you can see tiny little, you know, holes in the ground, in the grass. So again, using the same logic, we want to get away with the least amount of particles as possible. So we want to try and bring some of those particles from the back to the front. So the way we do this, I'm zooming through this, by the way. Sorry if it's fast, but we do have to get through a lot. We're going to be using the weight gradient tool. So we click on this bad boy, and then I'm just going to drag from wherever the camera is and just drag it up to be about there. I've got a garbage truck outside. Apologize if you can hear Mr. Juggernaut. So just dragging it out to about there. So the red or something that's like a value of 1, and blue is a value of 0. So I want to get it so that it's not completely dark blue, but just a little light blue, so there's just tiny little bit of grass at the back there, but most of it is towards the front. And then to cut away the stuff that's out of view of the camera, I'm going to be using a weight amount of 0, and I'm just going to draw like this. And now going into top view mode, now that I know the basic parameters of where the grass is looking, I'm going to paint out what isn't visible to the camera. And this was a little method that I came up with when I was working on the Architecture Academy, because I noticed that, yeah, all this grass was getting calculated in the render, and that meant you had to increase the particle amount in order to make the ground look, covered. And then I realized, why don't we just paint it out, and it worked. So I stuck with it. So you can now, in order to make this apply to the grass, because if you look, it hasn't made any difference to the particle system. Underneath vertex groups, you want to click on density, and then you'll see one there that says group. Ta-da! And when you do that, you'll see that now that weight painting has now applied to our mesh here. So it's all that is now cut out, and most of it is more towards the front, and then there's less at the back. So to show you what that just did, I'll give you a little, let's do another render. Using just that, you can see that we barely touched the render times, I guess because a few of them have to be drawn, maybe it's a little bit more, but we've barely touched the render times, and we've increased the amount of particles without having to increase the number here at all. So, little tip for you. All right, let's now get serious about it. Let's increase the particle count to be 300,000. All right, now let's give this a render, and you'll probably see that we need some work done. All right, let's have a look. Okay, great. So this is how it looks at 300,000, which is, I mean, it's not bad. It's actually, that's a solid attempt. But the trouble is that this looks like carpet now. And the reason it looks like carpet is that every single grass blade is almost the same size. There's a tiny little bit of randomization there, but not much. In the real world, grass doesn't grow at like flat uniformity across everywhere. There's always patches of it that are growing taller than others, and that can be from any number of reasons, like some areas receiving more rain than others, some areas receiving more sunlight, more shade. If a dog pisses on the lawn, that will seriously affect it. Like there'll be a little extra like energy in the grass there that'll be puffing up. It's like the real world is just like bumpy, is all I'm trying to say. That's an easy way. Well, just spilt over my water there. Luckily, I had the lid on. Okay. Embarrassed myself. So, the way we do that in Blender is by using a texture to affect our particle system. So, with the particle system here still selected, if we go down here, all the way down, and underneath textures, if we click new, we can add a texture just for this particle system. This wasn't here, like, I don't know when they added this, but feels like an addition in the last year. But anyways, now from the texture panel, if we just select particle system texture, we can now add in a particle, we can now adjust the texture which is going to affect this. By default it's set to image, which I don't like. Let's instead set that to Voronoi. And once we've added in the Voronoi texture, in order to first of all see it applied to our texture here, to our particle system, sorry, underneath influence, this is where you tell it how it's going to affect the particle system. By default it's set to time, which from what I see makes no difference in any way. So underneath hair, what you want to check is length. So now this texture is going to affect the length of the particles. And look at that. You can automatically see like how much more realistic that is. Even in the viewport, that looks closer to real life. So really important. Now, at the moment, the texture is like it's too wavy, which is going to be too obvious to the viewer. Let's turn this back. Let's go 0.1. And I might go even further. Let's go 0.05. Make it look really choppy. And if you find that there are areas of it where it's like you can actually see through it, because there are parts of it where it's like really cut, what you can do is underneath the colors, if you turn down the contrast, that will ensure that, because basically whatever's black here in this texture here is going to have zero, zero length of particles. So you want to try and get it so that it's a gray color at least. And then you can increase the brightness if you want, so to make everything a little bit taller. And yeah, that should look a lot nicer. So let's give this another render now, just with the addition of that texture, and you'll see immediately how much better it looks. Let's just see with this. And boom, check it out. Look at that. So that automatically, as you can see, just looks infinitely better. And that's what you want to do. You want to try and break up the uniformity of the grass. That's like probably the #1 rule when it comes to making a good grass scene, is break up the uniformity. Like grass that's why stuff looks like fur or like carpet, because by default everyone just leaves the particle system as uniform distribution across it, which is not like real life. So problem you can see the ground, which is white, and we don't want to be able to see the ground. Or you can see the ground, you know, that's all right, but the ground shouldn't be white, obviously. So let's add a particle, a node, a material node to the ground. All right. So I'm going to go texture, image texture, and I'm going to be using, we're going to use a texture. I mean, these are some textures that came with the Grass Essentials, which you don't have to use. You don't have to feel like I'm like forcing you to use these. You can just get some off cgtextures.com, and they're pretty much, you know, going to be very close to this. They're just ground and dirt textures. I'm going to go with a rocky looking one like this guy here, number 3, and add that guy in there. Dum dum da dum 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 da dum. Okay, that guy's in, and I'll connect him up to the diffuse input there, and I'm going to add in a mapping node. And this is so that we can, because that texture, like if we just actually, let me just turn off this particle view here. If we gave this a little render now, well, first of all, yeah, let's UV unwrap that very quickly. And you'll see exactly, yeah, like look at the size of that thing. That's crazy. And actually, that's bark. That's not what I wanted at all. Yeah, these thumbnails, they're not big enough. Let's go with a rocky one. What's something that looks like rock? Okay, that's kind of dirt and rock. Let's get that guy in there. But basically, because these textures here are seamless, seamless means that you can tile them. And you shouldn't be able to see the seam, or the seam should be at least not that noticeable, because it's almost impossible to get something completely seamless, but you know, we'll try. So we've added this in here, UV coordinates, a mapping node, and then now I'm going to set this scale to be, let's go 20 each. All right, which is going to look a little better, probably even more. Let's go 35, 35, and that's a lot better already. All right, now one other thing that we can use to affect the particle, like the realism of the scene, is that in the real world, real ground is bumpy, like it's wavy. Ground is never perfectly flat unless it's been, you know, a surveyor's gone out there and measured something and, you know, put some concrete on it or whatever. The real world, you know, the ground is just wavy, like there's little bumps and notches and all sorts of stuff throughout it. So that's what we want to try and put in our scene here. So the easiest way to do that is by using a displacement node. Oh look, the ceiling's up on the roof now. Sorry, the ground is up on the ceiling. Whatever. So adding a displacement here, I'm going to click on New Texture. And look, now it's way too far down again. That's weird. So go back to the texture panel here, and let's go Displacement Texture. By default, it's set to Image again. Let's go Clouds. And look at that. We've now got some wavy looking stuff. So we can adjust this, you know, we can make this look less. But the biggest one you want to first of all turn down is the strength of this displacement. By default, you know, it comes out really heavy at 1. So you dial it back, and let's go also, yeah, let's change the noise here, noise size, to get some like nice, I don't know, I might go like sort of like slightly wavy like that. And I'll turn this down to be even further, even smaller, to be, you know what, I'm going to do something different. Let's go smooth shading on that, but I am going to, let's crank that back up, yeah, 0.08, and I'm going to turn the depth down so that this is like mostly smooth, and I'll turn the size up. Alright, so we've got a little bit of waviness going on, which is cool, and I'm going to add in another displacement node. How about this? And then this one, I'm going to make clouds again, but, oh, hang on a minute. Which one is which? I think it must be, texture 2. Alright, let's go small. Let's call it small. Alright, I'm going to get there quickly. Here we go. Turn this down, and then turn this size down here as well. Okay. And let's turn up the depth. There we go. Now we're getting somewhere. Alright, and then I'll set this down to what it should be, like 0.05. So now we've got some big waves in there with some smaller waves. The big waves are, you know, a little too big. But something like that, I don't know, I'm sort of playing around now. But that is going to look a lot nicer than what we had before. So we've added in the texture for the ground. So that's there. So we shouldn't be able to see the white anymore. And we've also added in 2 displacements. So the ground should be a little bit wavy now. We've also got in the texture from the for the particle system. So that should be in full effect as well. All right. So now this is the problem. The particle system is above. See in this modifier stack here. Particle system's above the displacements. So that was not a good decision. So let's try that again. Yeah, if you don't, then that means that the particle system lays out its carpet and then it makes the ground wavy and it doesn't match up. So particles basically always have to be underneath everything else. If you ask me, there should be like a little warning that tells you, the strands don't affect it. Anyways, but look at that. That is starting to look like real grass now. How about that? That's looking pretty cool. I think that this waviness is a little too extreme. Let's turn that down. Oh, maybe it's not that one that's extreme. Let's go this one. Yeah, that's going to look a little nicer, I think. Great. And that'll be fine. Cool. All right, so one other thing that can really impact how grass looks, and this is like, it's so easy, it's almost cheating. You want to use something to cast a shadow onto your ground. The one I recommend is always get a something off, CG textures. Let's go CG textures. I've just got it on my separate window here. But you can get some trees off here. Let's get some trees. Nature. Trees. And you've got some alpha mask trees here. So if you download one of these, you can use them in Blender to create a nice shadow onto the lawn there. So I've got some already, which you can download off Blender if you want with this tutorial. Just, look at this on Blender and you'll see it. And the way you want to import a texture like a tree with an alpha masked background is by using what's called the import images as planes. So if you just type in planes into your file preferences, add-ons, planes, then you'll see import images as planes. So this enables you to go file, import images as planes. The reason you use this, of course, is that essentially what am I trying to say? I'll just pick a tree here first and then I'll tell you about it. All right, let's go with I'm gonna go with this one right here. Okay, this is a tree line. Okay, I created these ones myself a while back, and I'm going to go, and this is really important, down here, material settings, diffuse and transparent. Import that guy, and look at that. So that now matches the dimensions of the plane, which is why you use the import images as planes. Otherwise it never matches. You kind of have to like try and line it up. It doesn't work. So you always use that add-on, and also it's already created for us the node system, so that it takes into account the transparency part of the PNG there, which is a big help as well. So I'm going to rotate this around and let's check this out. Okay, I'm going to go Shift Z and look at that already. With our sun here selected, if we wanted the sun, the light to be sharper, we just adjust that centimeter there. I'm going to go, let's go 5 centimeters because it is morning, so it should be a softest looking shadow. So something like that. All right, and now if we look at it from the view, let's grab this. Let's pull back our trees a little bit. Let's pull them back, and yeah, that should be much better. Yeah, awesome. All right, now the other thing I want to do is with the world settings there, I'm just going to set that to black. And the reason for that is that I want there to be skylighting. Like normally if you wanted skylighting, you could just adjust this and make this, a blue, and now the shadows are a nice bluish color. But when we add in our, volumetrics later for the mist, this world settings here won't affect the mist in any way. So we have to add in a separate lamp for this. So I'm just going to create just duplicate this sun lamp, rotate it around so it's sort of on the other direction of the which way the sun is facing, and just loosely set it up here. I'm going to set the size of this to be really high because I want it to just be like soft shadows all over everything, and I'm going to make this a nice light blue color, and I'll turn the strength down to 2. So let's have a look at that, and the shadows now, there you go, should be a nice light blue color. Cool. So now that I've done that, let's give this another render with those new settings. Boom. Nice. It's very noisy, so the next one I'll make sure that the sampling is set to at least 50 so you can start to see the actual grass coming through. But that is a good result. That's starting to look really cool. The other thing that we were going to do, this is like a series of things to make grass look more realistic, you know, just extra things. You can add some visual interest to your ground. Shock, horror. Instead of it just being a flat plane with a few bumps that we've already added, how about we use this proportional fall off tool down here, turn it on, or you can just hit O, the hotkey, and then using the mouse wheel I can scroll up and down, and we can just make these little mounds. Little mounds, and I might create one here. Let's move this one up. It's a little sharp actually, let's pull it back. Let's go up to, alright, hang on a second. I don't like where that one's placed. This is where I want my main sort of mound to be. This one's going to be a little further back, but that's all good. Another one up in the end there. Cool. I want this to sort of, you know, the whole point of this is to make it look like an appealing sort of scene. And I don't know, there was some scientific research I read. I don't remember where it was. It sounded like from the University of Bologna. But it was something that was like humans prefer winding paths as opposed to straight ones. I don't know. I mean, there's some facts you read that you're like, all right, university people, are you just using an excuse as to why you were taking a hike instead of going to class? Oh, we were testing and everyone's like looking around, they like point to one guy, and one guy's like, the winding paths, and they're like, that where's your proof? And then they just published on lunch a bunch of nonsense. All right, let's move along now. This is it's starting to look, yeah, it's starting to got some hills and stuff in it. Let's give this a render now and let's see how that looks. Hey, how about that? That looks pretty good to me. That is nice. That's actually come out better than my practice one, I think. Kind of. Yeah, a little. Yeah. And texture, you know, distributions worked really well. All right, one thing before we add in anything else, I want there to be a background. We got just darkness. We've got a grassy plane into the void of nothingness, and it's not too pleasing. So in order just to shape the rest of the scene so we know, you know, just broad strokes how the rest of the scene's going to look, I'm going to import in an image which is from the Nature Academy. I'll let you download it. It's on Blender Guru. With this, it's just one of these skies here. I mean, if you want, you can get one off CG Textures as well. Other things, I don't know. You know, where did that thing go? Okay, I found it. It's right here. It's this guy. Alright, I went past it. So, because we're going to be using this as the background, I'm going to be using material settings, emission. So I'm going to click import. There he is. I'm going to scale this up, and I'm going to put him at the back here. And again, the reason I'm using a plane, it's like the first time I've used a plane for a sky in years, because I normally just use HDRs nowadays. But because volumetrics are not influenced by the world environment, kind of have to get a little bit more creative. So yeah, I'm just putting this guy out here, and if I just go into rendered view mode right now, then you can see how that looks with some mountains in the background there. Like you can see, this is pretty basic, like how to get a nice, you know, looking scene very quickly. Yeah, it's pretty easy. Now, by default, it's made it so that this plane only affects the camera, like it's just a bright, you know, plane viewable to the camera. But since I actually want it to affect the volumetrics later, I'm just going to turn that off, which didn't really make much of a difference, like a slight difference. But when we add in the volumetrics, that will actually kind of light up the volumetrics just a little bit. So that's kind of cool. Alright, so now that I've got that, let's give this another render with our, you know, grass and everything else. I'll up the samples. You can see I've come a long way from the start. And let's give this a render now. Alright, so that is pretty cool. The only downside is that I guess the shadow of these trees is so smooth that it actually looks like it's shadows from the clouds. Which, I mean, is not terrible, but, you know, I want it to actually look like it's, you know, shadows from a sun that's coming from the side. So I'm just going to sharpen them up just a little bit, but that's about it. Now, let's talk about the trail. One thing that can help for composition is to have a leading line which is going to guide the viewer down somewhere. So currently your eyes aren't really going in any particular direction. They're sort of, yeah, they're leading out to the back there, but just barely. So our way to do this is by creating a trail, a winding trail. So I'm going to use a weight paint, another vertex group, and this vertex group I'll just call trail. And I'm just going to paint from wherever the camera is right now using a weight paint brush of 1. I'm just going to paint like this. Just a sort of winding path. The most important thing is that from wherever the camera is positioned, that you have the path starting from like directly in front of the camera. Because when you do that, what you find is that it sort of looks more inviting to the viewer because the pathway is going directly in front of the camera. So it looks almost like you're actually there, like in the scene, which is kind of cool. I'm also trying to get rid of any, like just red and blue. That's all I want. I don't want any in-between colors because that can sort of influence the grass negatively by making them half as tall or whatever. So I want them to be on or off. So anyways, so we've got one vertex group, the vertex group that we painted the first time, which is this one here, and then we've got this trail, okay? So I want the grass here to be using the main vertex group for the density, but I want the length to be affected by the trail. Now if I just turn on particles here, you'll see what this has done. It's put all the grass on the trail, which is the opposite of what I want. I want the grass to be not on the trail. So if I click that little button there, that's going to make it negative, whatever the vertex group is. Ta-da! So now the grass is everywhere but the trail, which is perfect. So, awesome. Let's give this another little render now with our new settings, and let's see how that looks. Awesome. So you can see immediately the effect that that trail has done. It's just created a nice guiding line leading you through to the end of the picture, which is it's just beautiful. So now, talking about the rest of our grass here. It's great, but it looks like a golf course. The golf course effect, caused when you have one type of grass that you're trying to make it look like it's in the wild, like, oh, it's a, you know, Sahara in the middle of nowhere, but it looks like it's been so carefully looked after because there's no weeds. And in the real world, weeds are absolutely everywhere. They're just, you can't stop them. If you've ever owned a lawn, you'll know exactly what I mean. You have to get out the weed killer every weekend, go out there and whack them. They're just constantly growing, and in you know, the wild, it's even more so. So that's what we're going to be adding. So we're going to be using the grass essentials. Again, if you don't have the grass essentials, that's fine. You can skip this step, but it'll just show you, you know, some extra things you can do. So I'm just going to, the same way that we added in the first grass, file, append, and I'm going to be going to the weed section. Where is that weed section? Oh, weeds, and I'm going to be using the chickweed to start with. Let's drop this guy in here. Group, append from library. Let's drag him out of the way and make sure that we turn him off so he's not in view over here. And I'm going to add in another weed. Let's go Dallas grass. That's one's always good. Nice little bunch of grass all in one place. Always looks really good in a scene. It's one of my favorites. And another one that I'll add in is nutsedge, plantains, prickly grass, speedwell. No, I think those ones are going to be... Oh, wait a minute. No. In the grass section, we're going to be using a, what's it called? Grama grass, blue grama grass. Okay, now this is going to create like some really long strands, like some long looking, you know, bits of grass. So I'll add in this guy, blue grama grass. And that's what this one looks like. So it's this really long looking grass. And I'll show you something we can do in combination with the Dallas grass to make this look really cool. So I'll disable that. So first of all, let's add in the Dallas grass weed. So this one is, alright, let's turn off these displacements and the main. Okay, so it goes a little bit faster. So yeah, adding them in just the same way as we did the first one. Add a new particle system. Then from the drop down, select grama grass. And there we go. We've got some of that. Then I want to add in, I said Dallas grass first, didn't I? Doesn't matter. Add in the Dallas grass next and drop that in there. And you can see that these are actually sharing the same point. So from where they're sprouting from, it's from the exact same area. So I'll increase the Dallas grass height just because I want it to be a little bit taller than the main grass. So just find out how tall the grass is, which you can get from the side here. And make sure that these particle systems, by the way, are above your displacements, otherwise it's all going to be whack again. Yeah, add those above it, good. And alright. Okay, so where's the Dallas grass? Hang on a second. Yeah, because of the because of the displacements, it's kind of hard to see now. But normally you can see from the side which one is taller. But yeah, the Dallas grass, okay, it's pretty big now, so that's fine. Now these big long strands, these are the ones from the grama grass which we've added. So we can turn those down in size. I'm going to go about 2. Now normally you wouldn't tweak this, but you want them, you know, just to be a little bit smaller, like little tiny sprouts sort of coming out the top there. Now, anyway, what I was saying before I got distracted, was that you can see that the Dallas grass and these strands are actually coming from the same area, the same little point on the plane. And the reason for that is that for each particle system you've got something called a seed value, which is the randomized offset of where things actually sprout from. So when you change this, you can see that if you just, you know, scroll through this, you can see like an infinite placement of the different grasses. If you leave them all at 0, then they'll all sprout out of the exact same area, which is not good. So you want to change them so that each one has its own seed value. But one thing you can do, because we've got Dallas grass in these ones, it actually looks cool with this long bit coming out the top of the Dallas grass, the main little bunch there. So I'm going to leave them both at seed 1, so they're now sharing the same point, which is something that, I don't know, I was experimenting with and I thought it looked pretty cool. I'm also going to make sure that it doesn't land, it's also affected by the group, so the distance from the camera, and again, the trail, negative whatever the trail is. And I'm also going to increase the count of the Dallas grass to be 500. Alright, so nice and bushy. And I'm just going to do the exact same thing with this one here. Group, trail, negative, and there we go. And you can increase or decrease the amount of these little long strands that sort of come out of it. But you're just trying to make it look like it's, you know, as wild looking as possible. So let's have a look at this grass now with just those 2 weeds added to it. And let's see how that looks. Alright, so there you go. With just those extra weeds, you can see it automatically starts to look a little bit more like a, you know, real wild scene because there's some weeds sprouting through it. I'm going to amp them up though. I don't think there's enough. Not enough for my liking. So let's increase the Dallas grass. Let's go 1,000. And I'm just going to increase the size of that Dallas grass as well, so it's a little bit taller. And the same with these longish looking strands. Let's go 500 of them. And I'm also going to add in a chickweed, which is another one that we added in, another weed type. And the chickweed looks like, let's turn these other ones off. These tiny little sprouts of like leaves, and they're very common weed type. You see them a lot. So I'm adding in that guy, and I'm going to amp it up. Let's go again, I don't know, let's go 2,000 with the chickweed. Alright, and let's go like seed value of 3, so they're different, they're not sprouting on the same point. Hair length of 6, make them a little bit bigger, and again we'll just use the same, you know, group. It really amps up the density when you do that, which is cool. And then the trail, make sure that it cuts through the trail as well. And yeah, we could give that a render now, or we could just try it with another weed. Let's have a look here. See any other weeds do we want to add in? We've got some giant wild rye, which is interesting. Let's try this guy. I didn't think I used this one for my scene, but why not? Why not this guy? Okay, I think these are just like the long strands, which are good as a, you know, grass particle system of their own. They're not really good for creating bunches, so yeah, we'll skip on that. Let's go crabgrass though, so that's more of a bunch. Let's add in that guy. This guy right here. So I'll take him. Let's go to the first layer here, and let's go new particle system, crabgrass. And again, make sure that we set this to be group, negative the trail, and we're going to get to the volumetrics eventually, guys. We'll get there. So those are nice and big, which is good. Alright, let's see how that looks with those extra adjustments there. Oh, change the seed value to 6, something different. Let's see how that looks now. Alright, there we go. So you can see it looks a lot more chaotic now. with just that extra adjustment, adding in these bunches here. I think the bunches are a little tall. I'll turn them down a bit, the crabgrass. And the rest of it is pretty good. So I'm going to leave the rest of it. What we're going to do now is add the volumetrics. Volumetrics. So the aim is to create a misty sort of look. This is the one that I went with, which, you know, looks crazy different to how this turned out. But it's a, you know, it was an experiment with volumetrics and stuff. You can see, all right, Adobe, get out of here. We don't need to be reminded every 10 seconds. We've got this nice sort of wavy, misty effect, and the aim is to create what's called radiation fog, which doesn't sound good. But that's the technical term for that type of fog, which is when in the early morning, I think what they call it, the difference between the dew point and the air temperature is less than 4 to 2.5 degrees Celsius or something, I don't know, some specific thing. And it basically causes like condensation to rise off it, which gives you this low-hanging fog. So the fog should be closest to the grass, and then as it goes upwards, it should sort of dissipate a little bit. So in the world settings, you've got something here, you've got volume. Now you can add in a volume which will affect the entire world. But when you do that, it will choke up your render. Like the lighting, you'll have to make like crazy thick to cut through all the lighting. You'll have so many problems. I can't really find a use for using world volumetrics just yet, because I find it chokes everything out. There's no way for it to know yet in Blender what the camera's looking at and to only calculate it inside that. So it goes crazy. So what you're going to do instead, I'm telling you what you're going to do. You will do this. Add in a cube and just flatten it a little bit. And then if you want to scale this on everything but, like, because if you just scale this like that, it's going to go big. So if you just hit S and then Shift Z, it's going to scale it on everything but the Z axis. And look at that. So we've now got this cube which has been stretched out to about that size, which is good. Now, we want to apply the scale, which is important. And we want to have a look at how this looks just on its own with the lighting. So let's get the lighting, move that to its own layer. Let's just focus on this volumetric cube there. And actually, I'll split this in the other direction. Let's go to the node editor. And we'll add a new material to this cube here. Delete the diffuse. And in place of it, we're going to be adding in a volume scatter shader. So this volume scatter shader, we're not going to be connecting anything to the surface. So that's what you normally do with any other material. This is volumetric, so it's only going to be connected to the volume. If you put anything in there, it's just going to cancel it out. So just leave that in there. And this density amount is always set too high. I find like 0.1 is generally pretty good. And if we just hit Shift Z, you can see automatically what effect that's had on this little cube here. And from the view of the camera, this is now how it looks inside our scene there. So really foggy. Oh, that's the other thing. You want to make sure that let's just make this full screen. That this, like, because from the view of the camera, you can see that the top part, there's no volumetrics. So you want to make sure that there is volumetrics always. Turn off proportional fall off. So just increase the size of that, to be, just so there's, it's just above wherever the camera is looking, just slightly. Otherwise, you'll get an ugly sort of cut-off sort of look. So something like that, that's pretty good. But as I said before, we want the mist to be low-hanging. So this is where you have to get a little bit fancy. What we want to do is we want to add in, first of all, a gradient texture, this guy right here. Drop that into the density input of our volume scatter. And if you hit Shift Z, you'll see that now there's a gradient from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. Okay, just a very slight gradient. If you set it to quadratic, I think it's a little bit more obvious, but there we go, a little bit like that. And then we want to rotate it, so I'm going to add in a texture coordinate node, and then let's go mapping. Let's go take the output of the generated, and then put that into the input here for the gradient. And then I'm going to set this Y. I'm just hoping that this works. I'm going to hit 90. It worked. Whew. Last time I did this, for some reason, it wasn't correctly going. But what you should have is that the fog is now going from top to bottom in that direction, all the way around. You want to check like the front and the side axes, because sometimes this is weird. Like volumetrics are just mad with mapping. It's crazy. Understanding what these values do is just almost impossible to do. It's just crazy. Trying to create a simple gradient effect is, because it doesn't work like a standard 2D image. It's 3 dimensions, there's volume, it's crazy. So I don't know, anybody out there who understands, vector mapping, maybe you can tell me a better way. But this is the way I do it. Once I've got that now, going from top to bottom, I want it to be the other direction. So I just flip this. I flip it on its head, and then I find out where it is, and then I just move it up a little bit, like that. And now, if we just go back to that, you can see that the mist is now low hanging, and provided you don't apply the rotation, then you should be fine. Now, it's too thick at the moment, and the reason for that is that it's just using a density of whatever this is, like 1. So I'm going to add in here a math node, set this to multiply, and then this value here basically then becomes the density. So I can set that to 0.1, and that looks good. But as well as that, I want to control what the lowest amount of density there can be for this cube. So if I add in a color ramp node, that hasn't adjusted this at all in any way yet, but now if I set this this black value here, the black means 0 volume. So if I increase this, you can see at the top part of that cube is now filling up with some volume. So I just want to make sure there's always some bit of volume there. So I'm just going to set this to be a 0.1, so just a little bit, because otherwise it just looks weird if it just cuts off cleanly. The scene just looks bizarre. I also want to just bring up that low-hanging fog just to be a little bit higher up, so it's not completely, like dissipating from beneath the ground. And then that should be pretty good with the rest of it. Great, fantastic. So let's drag in the rest of the scene. And there's one more thing before we render. This is very important. Underneath volume sampling down here, you've got something that says step size. Now by default it's set to 0.1. The lower you go, the more accurate the volume rendering will be, but the longer your render times will be. Now I set this at 0.1, and my render times were like 4.5 minutes, and then I did 0.5 and the render times were like 1.5 minutes, and there was virtually no difference in quality. So this step size is a bit of a misdemeanor. I don't know. I don't get it. I don't know why it matters that much. I'm going to set it to 2 because, it doesn't really matter that much. We're getting this light haze. We're not going for like precise to the millimeter, volumetrics. So you'll thank me later. Set that to 2. Oh, also maximum steps. Supposedly the maximum steps it'll pass through before it gives up. I don't know what that means either. But I know that lowering it reduces the render times and doesn't make much of an effect either. So turn that one down. And if you want some more realism, here's a little tip. You can increase the render times a little bit by going under light paths and setting the volume bounces from 0 to 1. So you'll get a bounce off the ground or a bounce within the volume, whatever. And so you'll have the volume will have a little bit more color to it essentially. So we'll give it a go. Let's see how this looks now with those changes. Okay, so that looks pretty cool. It still looks like the fog of death is, it's coming in a bit. So we're going to have to dial that back. Another little tip. Oh, sorry, wrong way again. Let's do this. Another thing that we're going to do, you will do, is we're going to add in some wavy, sort of like give it more of a cloud, like a sort of a blowy mist, because at the moment this is like a fine mist which has just encapsulated everything, but there's no variation to it. It's not like the wind has blown and there's like thicker parts over here or over there. It's just uniform. And as I've hinted to in this tutorial, uniform's generally not all that it's cracked up to be. For realism's sakes, you want to add in some variation. Sorry, I added in the volume scatter. I shouldn't have done that. Bad me. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to add in a noise texture. And this noise texture we're going to use, noise texture is basically the cloud texture. It's the same thing. And we're going to use that to cut through the volumetrics to create areas where there's no volumetrics, basically. So first thing you want to do though is connect this to the object coordinate from there. So let me just zoom in here so you can actually see this better. So noise texture to the object coordinate like that, and then we'll take this and essentially we want to feed it into between our color ramp and our multiply node, because this is where it's gone from a gradient texture to a color, and now it's going into where it's actually going to become density. So we can use this, which is a color texture as well, and if we add a mix RGB node, we could take the output of this noise texture, put that into the mix input there, and then set this to multiply. So it'll take the dark values, that's what multiply does, of this noise texture and feed that through this, which is mostly white, and it'll use that to cut away at it. All right? Like I said that demeaningly. You all right? You got that? Huh? Have I distilled it down enough so you can figure it out from here? All right, let's see how that looks. All right, actually, probably you won't be able to see anything if we actually just go into rendered view mode yet, until we add in a brightness and contrast node, and then just set this to something really high, like 5. All right, so let's just see how that looks now with those settings changed to it. Okay, so it's, yeah, tiny little puffs are coming through this. So you want to make this a little bit lower. Let's go 2. And there you go. You can see it's kind of this like wavy form now. So contrast is a bit high at 5 because I don't want there to be like areas where there's completely no mist. That's going to look unrealistic. So an area of like, you know, like 2 is going to be all right. And I'll increase the detail on this as well. So it's a sort of a, you know, roughish sort of cloud throughout the whole thing. But that should look a lot better. And I'm also going to dial back the old volumetrics there. And unfortunately, when you dial back the volumetrics, everything else, like, it just becomes noisier. It's just the way volumetrics work. I think it's because it like reduces the number of dots, like these little tiny dots in the volume, and in doing that it like increases, like, just, yeah, you reduce the dots, so now it looks grainy, whatever. Let's give it a render, see how this looks now with those changes, and hopefully it looks good. All right, how about that? Nailed it. Cha-ching. It's pretty good. I mean, obviously, you gotta really ramp up the samples to get rid of this grain. But once you do that, should be pretty good. So, yeah. All right. We're gonna add some trees and some bushes in a sec. But first, final thing, we gotta increase the Bahia grass. I gotta double it actually, because you can see down here, there's patches where there's not enough grass showing through. And that's no good. I want it to look like real thick wild grass. So when it comes to like doing final renders and stuff like that, you got to amp it up, which increases, you know, render times a little bit, memory a little bit, but it'll make it look a lot better, just so much nicer. So do that, and now let's get into the trees. So this is the final touches. I mean, we're not using any product of mine. I've got these. You can download these. Download them now off Blender Guru. Oh, and I just did a, yeah, append. The hotkey is Shift F1 if you want to. Oh, sorry, reminded me. When it comes to trees and bushes, don't append, link. Linking uses far less memory. You'll thank me later. So what I mean by that is here, instead of going append, you go link. That's it. So find the tree that you've downloaded from my website. You can use this time wisely whilst I try and find out where I buried mine. Foliage trees. You can see some of these are from the Architecture Academy. Alright, I'm using this one. I put it in the shrubs folder. It's the Stag's Horn Samach, which has got a little bit of a red little chili flower kind of look to it, which is a good one because it's got some color to it. So that's going to become the focal element, which is the whole point of adding it. Because just having a grassy plain, you know, you post that online or share it to somebody, go, look at my grassy plain, and they go, cool man, that's a grassy plain. Now what? You know, like what's your next move, buddy? Come on. You got to have something that people can take away from it, you know. So the tree is something else. It's a focal element. It's not much. I mean, a human would be better. Adding in a hiker. I tried adding that, by the way. Didn't work. Then yeah. I wouldn't recommend it. Then you can add in the next shrub now, which is this little tiny darts gold one here. The shrub darts gold. No, wait, it's not that one. No, I got it wrong. Hang on. I'll find it. I'll find it. I always find it. This one. What is that? Oh, it's a sweet pepper bush. Sweet pepper bush. It's got these little like yellowy white flowers that come out of it. They're pretty good as well. And if you haven't yet seen it, check out the compositional video. And I bring that up now because it's this next bite is about balancing out the scene. So you want to have a shrub here and that's going to counteract this weight. But then you don't want to just have one lonely shrub. You want to have one in the background as well, you know, a little one over there. But then it's a little heavy on this side, so you want to have one up here maybe. That's got a silhouette, so that's got a little bit more visual, what do you call it, visual weight behind it. So then we're going to have another one over there. Now where's the trail? The trail is there. And then just so that it looks more complete, I'll add one way, way, way in the background there. And then one over on here as well. And this is going to look sick, man. It's going to look totally sweet. Alright. Yeah, so watch the compositional tutorial, which is on Blender Guru. Introduction to Composition? No, Understanding Composition. And that'll explain visual weight. And I only bring it up, I mean, composition's like, if you spent 3 hours learning about composition, like I can't think of a more like a better use for your time as an artist than learning about composition. Like any time spent on it is just going to be gold. Like you got to learn it and start applying it. So just, yeah, watch that video. It was all I could do to try and encapsulate all the books and all the stuff that's out there about rule of thirds and golden rules and stuff to try and make it easy to understand. So watch that, and hopefully you'll be right as rain. So give it a render now, and hopefully this will be it. Alright, there you go. So it's pretty much done. Well done. Give yourself a pat on the back, whatever that's going to do for you. I have no idea. This is what the final one looked like, and this is what my crazily different one looked like. I don't want to like say this is the tutorial result, because that is a lie. It's so different, but the techniques are exactly the same. It's just adding in the grass, getting the texture distribution correctly, and adding in weeds, and just tweaking everything till it gets right. I didn't want to do this entire scene because there's rocks and there's all sorts of trees and a tree stump and all that stuff that I didn't want to confuse it with. Yeah. And this is, if you give it out a longer render, this is basically the result you get as well. Yeah, so that's it, guys. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you make anything cool with it, do let me know, because I'm always looking forward to seeing what you make with it. Anyways, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.